Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now, let's start. The northern wind howled across the fjord, carrying with it the scent of blood and burning thatch. Jarl Jorund Wulfson stood at the prow of his longship, the Raven's Fury, his hand gripping his axe as the vessel cut through the churning waters toward the Saxon settlement. His men, 30 strong and battle-hardened, readied their weapons in anticipation. The morning sun glinted off helms and mail, casting the warriors in a golden light that belied their deadly purpose. "The gods favor us today," said Jorund's brother, Halvard, his beard braided tight against his chin. "Odin watches." Jorund nodded but said nothing. At 30 winters, he had led more raids than he could count on both hands, yet something felt different about this one. Dreams had plagued him for 7 nights, dreams of a woman with eyes like the sea during a storm and hair the color of wheat fields. She called to him in a language he did not understand, yet somehow comprehended in his bones. The Saxon village came into view, smoke already rising from its edges where the first wave of Vikings had made landfall. Jorund's fleet had divided, attacking from both shore and sea. The strategy had served them well across the eastern lands, and now in this corner of Northumbria. "They say Alderman Jarlath is a fierce warrior," Halvard said, interrupting Jorund's thoughts. "There he was blessed by their Christian god with 7 daughters but no sons. 7 daughters and no warriors to defend his hall," Frimund, their cousin, laughed from behind them. "The gods have abandoned him." Jorund frowned. Never underestimate a man fighting for his home. Even a cornered hare will bite. The Raven's Fury scraped against the shore, and Jorund was the first to leap into the shallow water. His men followed, forming a shield wall as they advanced toward the settlement. Arrows whistled overhead, most falling short or glancing off wooden shields painted with symbols of Thor's hammer and Odin's ravens. The battle was brief but brutal. The Saxon defenders fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered and outmatched by the Norse warriors who had made war their trade. Jorund cut down 3 men himself, his axe cleaving through mail and flesh with equal ease. Blood spattered his face and hands, hot against the cool morning air. As the fighting subsided, Jorund ordered his men to gather the spoils. "Take what silver and grain you can carry," he commanded. "We sail with the tide." It was then, as smoke cleared from the village center, that Jorund saw her, the woman from his dreams. She stood in the doorway of the alderman's hall, proud and defiant, a blade in her hand. Her hair, the color of summer wheat, was partially braided and fell to her waist. But it was her eyes that captured him, grey-blue like the sea before a storm, exactly as he had dreamed. 2 Viking warriors approached her, but Jorund raised his hand. "Hold," he commanded, his voice carrying across the village square. The men stopped, looking back at their jarl in confusion. Jorund approached her slowly, aware that she clutched the knife with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. She wore a simple blue dress with intricate embroidery at the neck and sleeves, the garment of a noble woman. "Where is Alderman Jarlath?" Jorund asked in the Saxon tongue, which he had learned through years of trade and warfare. Her eyes narrowed, fury evident in every line of her body. "My father fell defending our home from raiders like you," she spat, her voice steady despite the fear she must have felt. Jorund nodded, a strange respect blooming within him. "And you would avenge him?" "I would see you all in hell," she replied, raising her blade. A slower man might have died in that moment, but Jorund caught her wrist as she lunged, twisting the knife from her grasp. She did not cry out, even as he held her firmly. "You have courage, Saxon," he said. "What is your name?" "Why would I give my name to the man who slaughtered my people?" Halvard approached, wiping blood from his sword. "Jarl, we found the alderman's body by the western wall. His daughters are being rounded up with the other captives." "This is one of them," Jorund said, still holding the woman's wrist. "The eldest," she said defiantly. "Eadwyn Jarlathsdotter. And I will see you pay for this day's work, Northman." Jorund felt a strange jolt at hearing her name, Eadwyn. It seemed to resonate in the air between them, as if the gods themselves had whispered it to him in his dreams. "The eldest daughter would fetch a good price in Dublin," Halvard suggested. Or perhaps as a bride for one of the Jarls back home who seeks an alliance with these lands. Jorund released Eadwyn's wrist but stayed close, knowing she might try to flee or fight again. "She comes with me," he declared, surprising himself as much as his brother. "As my personal prize." Halvard raised an eyebrow but knew better than to question his Jarl's decision before the men. "As you wish." Eadwyn's eyes widened with horror, but before she could speak, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. A strange wind gusted through the village square, though the trees at the perimeter remained still. Only Jorund seemed to notice the unnatural phenomena, his gaze sharpening on Eadwyn. "Gather her sisters as well," Jorund ordered. "They will not be harmed." "Jarl?" Halvard questioned. The alderman was respected. "His daughters will be valuable hostages, not slaves. We will negotiate their ransom upon our return." It was a reasonable excuse, though not the true reason for his command. Something about this woman called to him, something beyond her beauty or defiance. Something old and powerful that he could not name. As the Vikings prepared to depart, Eadwyn was brought to the Raven's Fury along with her 6 sisters. The youngest couldn't have seen more than 12 winters, the eldest after Eadwyn perhaps 20. They huddled together on the ship, fear evident in their eyes but not a tear among them. "You have raised warriors after all, Alderman," Jorund murmured to himself as he observed their dignity in captivity. As the longships pushed away from shore, Jorund felt Eadwyn's gaze burning into him. He turned to find her staring with such intensity that lesser men might have flinched away. "I will escape," she said simply, her voice carrying to him over the sound of oars cutting through water. "And when I do, I will take your life as payment for my father's." Jorund met her gaze steadily. "You are welcome to try, Eadwyn Jarlathsdotter. But know this, you are now under my protection. No man in my company will harm you or your sisters." "Your protection," she scoffed. "You murdered our people, burned our homes, and now you speak of protection." "Such is the way of war," he replied. "But I am not without honor." "There is no honor in what you've done today." Jorund could not argue with her, not truthfully. Instead, he turned away and focused on the journey ahead. They would sail north to their settlement in Orkney, where his people had established a thriving community. There, he would decide what to do with the Saxon women, and perhaps understand why the gods had sent him dreams of this fierce woman with eyes like a storm. The voyage north was arduous. Autumn storms lashed the fleet, testing the skill of even the most experienced sailors. Through it all, Eadwyn remained defiant, refusing food until Jorund pointed out that her sisters followed her example and would starve if she continued her protest. Only then did she relent, accepting the bread and dried meat offered to her. On the 3rd night, as the ships sheltered in a natural harbour off the Northumbrian coast, Jorund found Eadwyn standing at the stern, staring at the distant shoreline. "You won't swim to freedom," he said, coming to stand beside her. "The water is too cold, the current too strong." "I wasn't planning to swim," she replied, not looking at him. "I was saying goodbye to my homeland. I may never see it again." Something in her voice, resignation mixed with quiet dignity, touched Jorund unexpectedly. "You will return one day," he said. "When proper ransom is arranged." Now she turned to him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "And if no one remains to pay such a ransom?" "What then, Jarl Jorund? Will my sisters and I become thralls in your household? Concubines for your men?" "No," he said firmly. "I have given my word. You are hostages, not slaves." "The word of a raider," she said bitterly. "The word of a Jarl," he corrected. "In my culture, that means something." Eadwyn fell silent, studying him with those unsettling eyes. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer. "My father said the Northmen worship old gods. Gods of thunder and war." "We do," Jorund confirmed. "Thor, Odin, Freyr, Freyja, they guide our steps and shape our wyrd. My mother." She hesitated, then continued, "She did not worship the Christ God as my father did. She came from farther north, from people who kept to older ways. She taught me things, knowledge passed down through her bloodline. Jorund's interest quickened. What sort of knowledge? Eadwyn seemed to regret having spoken. Nothing that would interest a man of war. But Jorund had seen the momentary trembling of the earth in the village, the unnatural wind that coincided with her anger. I think, he said carefully, that there is more to you than meets the eye, Eadwyn Jarlathsdotter. She turned away. My sisters are cold. I should return to them. Jorund let her go, watching as she moved gracefully across the deck to where her sisters huddled beneath woolen blankets. There was indeed more to this Saxon woman than he had first thought, and the dreams that had plagued him now seemed less like visions and more like warnings. The fleet reached Orkney after 7 days at sea. The settlement sprawled along a protected bay, its wooden buildings and palisade wall a testament to Norse ingenuity and determination. Smoke rose from dozens of hearths, and children ran to greet the returning warriors. Women scanned the arriving ships for their husbands and sons, relief or grief claiming their features as they counted the living. Eadwyn and her sisters were escorted to Jorund's Hall, a large timber building at the settlement center. Inside, carved pillars supported a high roof, and a central hearth provided warmth and light. Benches lined the walls, and at the far end stood a high seat decorated with intricate carvings of battles and gods. You will stay here, Jorund informed them. My sister Thyra will see to your needs. As if summoned by her name, a tall woman with honey-blonde hair approached. Unlike many of the other women, she wore a sword at her hip and carried herself with a warrior's confidence. So these are the Saxon prizes, Thyra said, appraising the 7 sisters with a critical eye. The eldest is comely enough. They are hostages, sister, not prizes, Jorund corrected. They are to be treated with respect. Thyra raised an eyebrow. Since when does my brother concern himself with the comfort of captives? Jorund gave her a warning look. Since I gave my word. See that they have clean clothes and food. The youngest 3 may help in the kitchens if they wish, but they are not servants. Thyra shrugged. As you command, Jarl. She turned to Eadwyn. Come, Saxon. Let me show you where you'll sleep. As Eadwyn followed Thyra, she glanced back at Jorund, confusion evident in her expression. She had clearly expected worse treatment than this. That night, as the settlement celebrated the raid's success with feasting and drinking, Jorund found himself distracted. He sat in his high seat, ale horn in hand, watching as his warriors boasted of their exploits. Normally, he would have joined in, recounting his own battles and honoring those who had fought well. Instead, his thoughts kept returning to Eadwyn. You're distracted, Halvard said, dropping onto the bench beside him. Is it the Saxon woman? Jorund took a long drink before answering. She is unusual. Halvard laughed. She's a beauty, I'll grant you that. But so are many women who wouldn't try to put a knife in your gut. There's more to her than her appearance, Jorund replied. Did you notice anything strange during the raid? When we confronted her in the village square. Halvard frowned, thinking back. Strange how? The ground. Did you feel it shake? After a battle, brother, my blood runs too hot to notice such things. Halvard studied Jorund's face. Why do you ask? Jorund considered telling his brother about the dreams, about the unsettling feeling that had followed him since they'd captured Eadwyn. But something held him back. No reason, he said finally. Too much ale, perhaps. Halvard clearly didn't believe him but knew better than to press. The Saxons follow the White Christ, he said instead. But I've heard some of their women still practice the old magic, especially in the north. They hide it well, for their priests would burn them as witches. Jorund's eyes narrowed. What do you know of such things? Only rumors. Tales told by traders. Halvard shrugged. But it might explain your interest in the woman. Before Jorund could respond, a commotion erupted near the hall's entrance. He rose, hand going to his sword, but relaxed when he saw it was only Thyra escorting Eadwyn into the feast. Eadwyn had been dressed in Norse clothing, a simple blue linen dress with a woolen overdress, secured at the shoulders with bronze brooches. Her hair had been combed and partially braided in the Norse style, though most of it still hung loose down her back. She looked uncomfortable but held herself with dignity as she approached Jorund's high seat. "The hostage wished to speak with you," Thyra explained, her tone suggesting she disapproved. Jorund nodded. "Leave us." Thyra hesitated, then moved away, though she remained within sight. "You honor us by joining our feast," Jorund said, gesturing for Eadwyn to sit on the bench near his seat. She remained standing. "I come with a proposal, Jarl Jorund." The hall had quieted somewhat, many eyes now on the Saxon woman who dared address their leader directly. "I'm listening," Jorund said, intrigued. "My sisters are young and frightened. The youngest, Erin, is only 12 winters. I ask that you allow them to return to Northumbria, to our mother's kin in the north. In exchange, I will remain as your hostage." Jorund leaned forward. "And why would I release 6 hostages for the price of 1? "Because I am the one with value," she said simply. "As Alderman Jarlath's eldest daughter, I am his heir. Any ransom would be paid for me, not my sisters." It was a reasonable argument, but Jorund suspected there was more to her offer. "And if I agree? What guarantee do I have that you won't attempt to escape the moment your sisters are gone?" Eadwyn met his gaze steadily. "I swear by my mother's blood and by the old god she honored that I will not try to escape while my sisters journey home." The mention of old gods caught Jorund's attention. "You honor your mother's gods over your father's Christ?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Eadwyn's face. "I honor both," she said carefully. "But an oath sworn to the old powers cannot be broken without consequence." Jorund considered her offer. 6 young girls would indeed be more trouble than they were worth, requiring food and protection while offering little strategic value. And something told him that keeping Eadwyn close might help him understand the dreams that had led him to her. "Very well," he said finally. "When the trading ship leaves for the southern ports in 3 days' time, your sisters will be on it, with enough silver to see them safely to your mother's kin." Relief softened Eadwyn's features, though she quickly masked it. "Thank you, Jarl. But understand this," Jorund added, his voice carrying through the now silent hall. "You are giving yourself into my keeping. While your sisters journey south, you will remain in my household, under my protection and authority." Eadwyn stiffened but nodded. "I understand." "Good. Now sit and eat. You'll need your strength." After a moment's hesitation, Eadwyn sat on the bench near Jorund's seat. The feast resumed around them, though many curious glances were cast their way. "They think you've taken me as a concubine," Eadwyn said quietly, noting the speculative looks. "Let them think what they will," Jorund replied, filling a horn with ale and offering it to her. "What matters is the truth between us." Eadwyn accepted the horn but didn't drink. "And what is that truth, Jarl Jorund? Why did you single me out during the raid? Why offer protection to the daughters of a man your warriors killed?" Jorund studied her face in the flickering firelight. Should he tell her about the dreams? About the strange pull he felt toward her? Would she think him mad, or worse, would she use such knowledge against him? "I have my reasons," he said finally. "Perhaps one day I'll share them with you." Eadwyn's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't press further. Instead, she raised the horn to her lips and took a cautious sip of ale. "Your settlement is larger than I expected," she admitted after a moment. "More civilized." Jorund laughed. "Did you expect us to live in caves like beasts?" "My father said the Northmen were little more than wolves in human form," she replied honestly. "But I see now he was wrong about some things." "And right about others," Jorund acknowledged. "We are raiders. We take what we want and burn what we cannot carry. But we are also builders, traders, storytellers." He gestured around the hall. "This is my home, Eadwyn. These are my people." "People who murdered mine," she reminded him, though her tone lacked the venom of earlier days. "Yes," he said simply. "That is the way of war." They sat in silence for a time, the weight of their different worlds hanging between them. Finally, Eadwyn spoke again. "My sisters, and I thank you for your mercy," she said formally. "Whatever your reasons." Jorund nodded, accepting her gratitude even as he wondered what she would think if she knew the truth, that he himself didn't fully understand why the gods had drawn him to her. All he knew was that the dreams had stopped the night he'd claimed her from the burning village, and that something about her presence both unsettled and intrigued him. 3 days later, as promised, Eadwyn's sisters departed on a trading vessel bound for the southern ports. Eadwyn stood at the docks, her face stoic as she bid them farewell, but Jorund noticed the trembling of her hands as she embraced each one. "Watch over Erin," she instructed the second eldest, a girl of perhaps 18 winters named Brenna. "And remember the path to Mother's people. Follow the river north until you reach the Standing Stones, then east toward the rising sun." "We will find them," Brenna promised, tears streaming down her face. "And we will arrange for your ransom, sister." Eadwyn smiled sadly. "Do not worry for me. I have made my choice." As the ship disappeared over the horizon, Eadwyn remained at the dock, her eyes fixed on the point where it had vanished. Jorund stood a respectful distance away, aware that this moment of grief was private. Finally, she turned to him, her face composed once more. "Thank you for honoring your word, Jarl." "I told you, Eadwyn, a Jarl's word means something among my people." She studied him for a long moment. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "you become part of my household. Not as a thrall or concubine, but as a guest." "A captive guest," she corrected. "Yes," he acknowledged. "But one who will be treated with respect." As they walked back toward the settlement, Jorund noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "A storm comes," he observed. "The first of the winter season, perhaps." Eadwyn glanced at the clouds, and for a brief moment, Jorund thought he saw them shift direction, moving faster toward the settlement. But that was impossible, no one could command the weather. "Yes," she said softly. "A storm comes indeed." That night, the worst gale in living memory struck the Orkney settlement. Winds howled like the wolves of Fenrir, tearing at roofs and toppling fences. Rain lashed horizontally, driven by gusts that bent even the sturdiest trees. Inside Jorund's hall, the inhabitants gathered around the central hearth, listening to the fury of the storm outside. "The gods are angry," muttered an old warrior, his one good eye fixed on the roof beams that creaked ominously above them. "Thor fights the Jotnar tonight," agreed another, making the sign of the hammer over his chest. Jorund moved among his people, offering reassurance and directing repairs where rain leaked through the roof. Throughout it all, he was aware of Eadwyn sitting quietly by the hearth, her eyes reflecting the firelight as she stared into the flames. When he finally approached her, she didn't look up. "Your people fear the storm," she observed. "With good reason," Jorund replied, sitting beside her. "Such weather can destroy ships and homes, kill livestock, ruin stored food. Yet you seem unconcerned." Jorund shrugged. "We are prepared for winter storms. Our buildings are strong, our food stores secure." Eadwyn nodded absently, still gazing into the fire. "In my mother's tradition, storms have meaning. They are not random. They come when the world is out of balance." "And what has unbalanced the world tonight?" Jorund asked, watching her face carefully. Her eyes flicked to his, then back to the flames. "Perhaps the gods are displeased with a Saxon woman living among Northmen. Or perhaps," Jorund suggested, "they sent the storm to prevent a certain Saxon woman from attempting to escape on the night her sisters departed." A ghost of a smile touched Eadwyn's lips. "Perhaps." A particularly violent gust shook the hall, and a section of thatch tore free from the roof. Rain poured in, dousing one of the wall torches and sending people scrambling away from the sudden deluge. Jorund rose quickly. "Help me," he ordered several nearby men, moving to address the damage. As they worked to secure a piece of oiled hide over the hole, Jorund glanced back at Eadwyn. She still sat by the fire, but now her eyes were closed, her lips moving in what might have been prayer. As he watched, the howling of the wind seemed to diminish slightly, the rain's intensity lessening. It took most of the night to secure the hall against the storm's fury. By dawn, the gale had passed, leaving behind a landscape of scattered debris and mud. Jorund emerged to assess the damage, finding it less severe than he had feared. A few outbuildings had lost their roofs, a section of palisade had collapsed, and 2 fishing boats had broken free of their moorings, but no lives had been lost. "We were fortunate," Halvard said, joining him in the village square. Other settlements along the coast fared worse, according to the messengers. "How much worse?" Jorund asked, frowning. Thorvaldstedding lost half its buildings and 3 people when the seawall broke. Gunhild's trading post was completely destroyed. Halvard shook his head. "Yet our damage is minimal. Strange, isn't it? The storm seemed to pass around us, hitting harder to the north and south." Jorund's gaze drifted to where Eadwyn stood in the doorway of his hall, watching the cleanup efforts. "Strange indeed," he murmured. Over the following weeks, Eadwyn gradually integrated into the rhythms of the Norse settlement. She helped with weaving and food preparation, tasks familiar to her from her life in Northumbria. The other women regarded her with suspicion at first, but her willingness to work and her knowledge of herbal remedies slowly earned their grudging respect. Jorund observed her from a distance, noting how she interacted with his people. She learned their language quickly, picking up Norse phrases and pronunciation with an ease that surprised many. She was particularly good with children, telling them stories in the evenings that blended Saxon and Norse elements in a way that fascinated even the adults who pretended not to listen. One evening, as winter tightened its grip on the land, Jorund found Eadwyn sitting alone on a bench outside his hall, staring at the stars. "You should be inside by the fire," he said, coming to stand beside her. "The night is cold." "The cold doesn't trouble me," she replied. "My mother's people live in lands far colder than this." Jorund sat beside her, following her gaze to the star-filled sky. "You speak often of your mother, yet rarely of your father." Eadwyn was silent for a moment. "My father was a good man," she said finally. "Stern but fair. He loved his daughters, though he always longed for sons to carry on his name and title." "And your mother?" A small smile touched Eadwyn's lips. "She was different. She came from the far north, from people who live in the shadow of great ice mountains. My father met her during a trading journey and brought her back as his bride. She taught me many things before she died, things my father disapproved of." "What sort of things?" Jorund pressed gently. Eadwyn hesitated, then turned to look at him directly. "Why do you ask, Jarl? What is your interest in me and my mother's teachings?" Jorund met her gaze steadily. "I have dreamed of you," he admitted. "Before we ever met. For 7 nights before the raid, I saw your face, heard your voice calling to me in a language I did not know." Surprise flickered across Eadwyn's features, followed by wariness. "Dreams are just dreams." "Are they?" "The dreams led me to your village, to you specifically. And then there was the trembling of the earth when you were angry, the wind that seemed to respond to your emotions." Jorund leaned closer. "And the storm that miraculously spared our settlement while devastating others. That was your doing, wasn't it?" Eadwyn stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "You speak madness. No mortal can command the elements." "I didn't say you commanded them," Jorund replied calmly. "But you influenced them, didn't you? Through whatever powers your mother taught you." Fear and defiance warred in Eadwyn's expression. "If I possess such power," she said carefully, "why would I remain your captive? Why wouldn't I have destroyed you and your raiders the moment you set foot in my village?" "That," Jorund said, rising to face her, "is precisely what I've been wondering." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Thyra, who approached with a grim expression. "Brother," she said, nodding to Jorund before casting a suspicious glance at Eadwyn. "The council awaits you in the mead hall. Traders from the east bring troubling news." Jorund frowned. "What news?" "King Eadwald has ordered reprisals against Norse settlements along the coast," Thyra replied. 3 trading posts have been destroyed, their inhabitants put to the sword. Jorund's expression darkened. "I will come at once." He turned to Eadwyn. "Return to your chambers. We will continue our discussion another time." As Eadwyn walked away, Thyra caught Jorund's arm. "Be careful, brother," she warned. "The Saxon woman is not what she seems." "I know," Jorund replied, watching Eadwyn's retreating figure. "That's what intrigues me." The council meeting confirmed the traders' reports. King Eadwyn of England, known as the Unready, had launched a campaign against Norse settlers and raiders following a series of particularly devastating Viking attacks. Among the dead were several prominent Norse merchants who had lived peacefully among the Saxons for years. "This changes our plans for spring raids," Jorund told the assembled warriors and elders. "Eadwyn will have increased his coastal defenses. We must look elsewhere for targets." "Or strike harder," suggested Frumund, his eyes gleaming with bloodlust. "Show the Saxon king what happens when he murders our kinsman." Several warriors shouted agreement, but Jorund raised his hand for silence. "Vengeance has its place," he acknowledged. "But we must be strategic. Blind rage leads to careless mistakes." The council debated late into the night, eventually agreeing to send scouts south when the weather improved. They would assess the Saxon defenses and identify vulnerable targets for spring raids. As the meeting dispersed, Halvard approached Jorund. "What of the Saxon woman?" he asked quietly. "If Eadwyn is killing Norse settlers in retaliation, he may well execute any Saxons who collaborate with us. Her value as a hostage diminishes." Jorund had considered this. "She remains under my protection," he said firmly. "Her status does not change." Halvard studied his brother's face. "You've grown fond of her." "I've grown curious about her," Jorund corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Halvard shook his head. "Be careful, brother. The woman has reason to hate you. Don't let a pretty face blind you to danger." Jorund clapped his brother on the shoulder. "When have you known me to be blinded by anything?" "Never," Halvard admitted. "Which makes your fascination with this woman all the more concerning." Later that night, unable to sleep, Jorund found himself walking through the silent settlement. A fresh dusting of snow covered the ground, his footprints the only ones marring its perfect surface. As he approached the small shrine dedicated to Thor and Odin at the settlement's edge, he was surprised to see a figure already there. Eadwyn knelt before the shrine, her head bowed. She wasn't praying, at least not to the Norse gods, but seemed to be in deep contemplation. A small pouch lay open beside her, herbs and what looked like small bones arranged in a pattern on the ground. "Do you seek guidance from gods not your own?" Jorund asked, making his presence known. Eadwyn didn't startle, as if she had sensed his approach. "I seek understanding," she replied, not looking up. "Your gods are not so different from my mother's. Different names, similar powers." Jorund moved closer, curious about the items arranged before her. "What is this?" "A divination," she said simply. "My mother taught me to read signs, in bones, in flames, in the flight of birds." "And what do the signs tell you tonight?" Now she looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "They tell me that blood will flow when the ice melts. They tell me that you and I are bound by threads we cannot see. And they tell me that a choice approaches, one that will shape the fate of many." Jorund crouched beside her, examining the pattern. "You speak of WYRD, fate. Your people call it WYRD. Mine call it something else. But yes, the tapestry of what has been and what must be." "And what must be between us, Eadwyn Jarlathsdotter?" Jorund asked softly. She gathered the bones and herbs, returning them to the pouch. "That remains unclear. The future is always in motion, shaped by the choices we make." As she rose to leave, Jorund caught her arm gently. "You didn't answer my question earlier. If you possess power over the elements, why remain my captive? Why not destroy me and my warriors?" Eadwyn was silent for a long moment. "Power has its limits," she finally said. "And its price. What I can do, it takes something from me each time. I cannot simply command the wind or earth to do my bidding without consequence." "What consequence?" "Life force. Energy. Years from my span of days, perhaps. She pulled her arm free of his grasp. And even at full strength, I could not have stopped your entire raid. I might have killed you, yes, but your men would have killed me and my sisters in return. Jorund nodded slowly, understanding dawning. So you chose captivity to protect them. I chose survival, she corrected. For all of us. And now? Your sisters are gone, safe with your mother's kin. What keeps you from using your power against me now? Eadwyn studied his face in the moonlight. Perhaps I'm waiting for the right moment, she said, her voice soft but edged with warning. Or perhaps I've seen something in you worth understanding before I decide your fate. With that, she walked past him, returning to the hall. Jorund remained by the shrine, contemplating her words. The woman was dangerous, more dangerous than he had initially realized. Yet instead of fear, he felt a growing fascination, a desire to understand her and the power she wielded. What game are you playing with me, Odin? He murmured to the night sky. What test is this? Winter deepened, snow piling against the walls of the settlement and ice forming thick on the bay. The community turned inward, focusing on crafts, storytelling, and preparing for spring raids. Eadwyn continued to integrate herself into daily life, her knowledge of herbs proving particularly valuable when illness swept through the settlement in midwinter. She worked tirelessly alongside Thyra and the other women, preparing remedies and tending to the sick. Jorund himself fell ill with the fever, and it was Eadwyn who cared for him during the worst nights, placing cool cloths on his forehead and forcing bitter herbal concoctions down his throat. In his fever dreams, he saw her surrounded by blue light, her hands glowing as she pressed them to his chest. He felt energy flowing from her into him, driving back the sickness that had taken 3 of the oldest members of the settlement already. When he finally regained clarity, he found her slumped in a chair beside his bed, exhausted. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept in days. "You saved me," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. Eadwyn stirred, blinking at him with tired eyes. "You're awake," she observed, reaching for a cup of water on the nearby table. "Drink." He accepted the water, studying her over the rim of the cup. "You used your power on me." She stiffened slightly. "I used herbs and cool cloths, as with all the others." "I saw the light," he insisted. "I felt what you did." Eadwyn sighed, too tired to maintain the pretense. "You were dying," she said simply. "The fever had taken root too deeply. Herbs alone would not have saved you." "Why?" he asked. "Why save the man who took you captive? Who killed your people?" She was silent for a long moment, her eyes downcast. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "Perhaps because despite everything, you've treated me and my sisters with more honor than I expected. Perhaps because your people need you." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Or perhaps because I'm not yet finished with you, Jarl Jorund." Before he could question her further, the door opened and Thyra entered, carrying a steaming bowl. "Brother," she exclaimed, seeing him awake. "The fever has broken." "Thanks to Eadwyn's care," Jorund said pointedly. Thyra glanced between them, her expression unreadable. "Yes, she has worked tirelessly. For all the sick, not just you." Eadwyn stood, swaying slightly with exhaustion. "He should eat something light. Broth and bread for now." "I've brought just that," Thyra replied, setting the bowl down. "Go rest, Saxon. You've done enough." After Eadwyn left, Thyra sat on the edge of Jorund's bed. "She didn't leave your side for 3 days," she said quietly. "Even when others offered to relieve her." "She's not what we thought," Jorund replied. "No," Thyra agreed, her expression troubled. "She's something else entirely. The question is, what?" As Jorund recovered his strength, he noticed a change in how the settlement's inhabitants treated Eadwyn. The suspicion had largely vanished, replaced by respect and even gratitude from those whose family members she had helped save. She was still a Saxon, still a captive, but she had earned a place among them through her actions during the illness. One evening, As the worst of winter began to ease its grip, Jorund found Eadwyn sitting alone by the shore, watching the first fishes appear in the bay's ice covering. "You should have a cloak if you're going to sit out in the cold," he said, draping his own fur-lined cloak around her shoulders. She accepted it with a nod of thanks. "Spring approaches," she observed. "Your raiders will soon take to their ships again." "Yes," Jorund confirmed, sitting beside her on the rocky shore. "Though our targets may change given the Saxon king's recent actions." Eadwyn was quiet for a moment. "Will you attack my homeland again?" Jorund considered lying but decided against it. "Possibly. The decision hasn't been made." She nodded, as if his honesty was what she had expected. "More death. More captives. The cycle continues." "It is our way," Jorund said, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. "It doesn't have to be," Eadwyn replied, turning to look at him. "Your people are skilled farmers, crafters, traders. You build, you create. Raiding is not the only path available to you. You would have us abandon our traditions? The way of our ancestors. I would have you consider that traditions can evolve," she said. "That the gods might value creation as much as destruction." Jorund frowned, uncomfortable with how her words resonated within him. "You speak of things you don't understand." "Don't I?" She gestured to the settlement behind them. "I've lived among your people for months now. I've seen how they work, how they care for one another, how they honor their gods. There is more to the Norse than raiding and warfare, Jorund. You know this." It was the first time she had used his name without his title, and the intimacy of it caught him off guard. "Why do you care what path my people follow? We are your captors, your enemies." Eadwyn was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to the ice-covered bay. "Perhaps I'm tired of being anyone's enemy," she finally said. "Perhaps I see potential for something different." "Different how?" "Peace," she said simply. "Understanding between our peoples. Trade instead of raids. Alliance instead of enmity." Jorund laughed without humor. "You dream of impossibilities. The Saxons would never trust the Norse, nor we them. Too much blood has been spilled." "Blood has been spilled on all sides," Eadwyn acknowledged. "But cycles can be broken, Jorund. Someone must be first to extend a hand in peace rather than raise a sword in war." "And you think that someone should be me?" he asked incredulously. She turned to him, her eyes serious in the fading light. "I think it could be us." The weight of her words hung between them, laden with possibilities Jorund had never considered. Before he could respond, a shout came from the settlement. They both turned to see a rider approaching at speed, his cloak flying behind him. "A messenger," Jorund said, rising quickly. "Something has happened." The news the rider brought was grave. A Norse trading ship had been captured by Saxon forces near the coast of Northumbria. Among the prisoners taken was a young woman matching the description of Eadwyn's youngest sister, Erin. "They believe her to be a Norse girl because of her clothing and her presence on the ship," the messenger explained. "She is being held at a Saxon fortress awaiting questioning by a bishop. If she is found to be consorting with pagans..." He didn't need to finish. The Saxons' punishment for apostasy was well known. Eadwyn's face had drained of color. "Erin," she whispered. "She's just a child." Jorund turned to her. "When does the bishop arrive at this fortress?" 3 days hence, according to our informant within the Saxon settlement," the messenger replied. "Then we have 3 days to retrieve her," Jorund decided. "Gather 20 warriors. We sail at first light." As the messenger hurried to obey, Eadwyn caught Jorund's arm. "You would risk your men to save my sister." Jorund met her gaze steadily. "I gave my word that your sisters would reach safety. My honor demands I fulfill that promise." "Let me come with you," she urged. "I can help." "It's too dangerous," Jorund objected. "If the Saxons capture you..." "They won't," she said with quiet confidence. "And you may need my abilities." Jorund considered her offer, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Finally, he nodded. Very well. But you will obey my commands without question. Understood. Understood, Eadwyn agreed. Thank you, Jorund. As they prepared for the rescue mission, Halvard pulled Jorund aside. Taking the Saxon woman is madness, he hissed. She could betray us the moment we reach Saxon shores. She won't, Jorund said with certainty. Her sister's life is at stake. And after? When the girl is safe. What then? Jorund had no answer for that. The truth was, he no longer knew what would happen between him and Eadwyn once this crisis had passed. The captive-captor relationship had evolved into something far more complex, something he couldn't easily define. We'll face that challenge when it comes, he said finally. For now, we focus on the rescue. They sailed at dawn, 2 longships cutting through the partially thawed waters of the bay. The journey south was perilous, with ice floes and late winter storms threatening the vessels. Throughout it all, Eadwyn stood at the prow beside Jorund, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Once, when a particularly vicious squall threatened to capsize the lead ship, Jorund saw Eadwyn close her eyes and extend her hands toward the storm. The wind eased almost immediately, the waves calming enough for the ships to regain stability. You'll pay for that later, he murmured, noting the way she swayed with sudden exhaustion. A price worth paying, she replied, gripping the gunwale to keep herself upright. They reached the Northumbrian coast under cover of darkness 2 days later. The Saxon fortress stood on a cliff overlooking the sea, its stone walls formidable in the moonlight. We cannot take it by force, Halvard observed as they gathered on the beach below. Not with 20 men. We won't have to, Eadwyn said, studying the fortress. I know this place. There's a sea cave beneath the eastern wall, accessible only at low tide. It leads to tunnels under the fortress, old smuggling routes. Jorund raised an eyebrow. How do you know this? My father was alderman of these lands, she reminded him. He made it his business to know every strength and weakness of the local defenses. And he shared this knowledge with his daughter. Halvard asked skeptically. Eadwyn's lips curved in a slight smile. Not intentionally. I was curious and quiet-footed as a child. Jorund studied the fortress again. The cave entrance will be guarded. Not likely, Eadwyn countered. Few know of its existence, and the tides make it treacherous. We have perhaps 2 hours before the water rises again. They moved silently along the shoreline, Eadwyn leading them to a narrow opening in the cliff face nearly invisible against the dark rock. As predicted, it was unguarded. The passage beyond was tight and winding, requiring them to proceed single file, water lapping at their ankles. The tide is already turning, Halvard warned as they navigated the tunnel. We must be swift. The passage eventually opened into a larger cave with several branching tunnels. Eadwyn hesitated, trying to orient herself in the darkness. This way, she finally said, pointing to the leftmost tunnel. It should lead to the fortress cellars. They followed her through the winding passageway, the sound of the sea fading behind them. After what seemed an eternity of darkness, they emerged into a dimly lit storage room filled with barrels and crates. The prisoners will be held in the East Tower, Eadwyn whispered. We need to climb 2 levels and cross the inner bailey. Jorund nodded to his men. 5 remain here to secure our retreat. The rest with me. They moved through the fortress like shadows, Eadwyn's knowledge of the layout proving invaluable. Twice they had to hide from passing guards, pressing themselves into alcoves or behind tapestries until the danger passed. Finally, they reached the base of the East Tower. A single guard stood before the heavy wooden door, looking bored and sleepy. Allow me, Eadwyn murmured, stepping forward before Jorund could stop her. She approached the guard openly, swaying slightly as if drunk or disoriented. Help, she called softly in Saxon. I'm lost. The guard straightened, his hand going to his sword. Who are you? How did you get in here? Please, Eadwyn continued, moving closer. I work in the kitchens. I got turned around fetching wine for the commander. As the guard relaxed slightly, recognizing her as a Saxon rather than a Norse invader, Eadwyn raised her hand as if to steady herself against his chest. The moment her palm touched him, the man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed without a sound. Jorund and his warriors emerged from the shadows, staring at the fallen guard in astonishment. "Is he dead?" Halvard asked, nudging the man with his foot. "No," Eadwyn replied, taking the ring of keys from the guard's belt. "Merely sleeping. He'll wake in an hour with a headache and no memory of what happened." Jorund gave her a searching look. "Another of your mother's teachings." "One of many," she confirmed, unlocking the door. "Come, we don't have much time." Inside the tower, they found cells lining a circular stairway. Most were empty, but from the uppermost cell came the sound of quiet sobbing. Eadwyn rushed ahead, keys jangling in her hand. "Erin," she called softly in Saxon. "Erin, it's Eadwyn." The sobbing stopped abruptly. "Sister," a young voice replied in disbelief. "Is it really you?" Eadwyn unlocked the cell door to reveal a thin girl with wheat blonde hair, her face tear-stained but her eyes wide with hope. She threw herself into Eadwyn's arms, nearly knocking her over with the force of her embrace. "I knew you'd come," Erin whispered. "I knew you wouldn't abandon me." "Never," Eadwyn assured her, stroking her hair. "But we must hurry. The tide will not wait." As they descended the tower stairs, an alarm bell began to ring in the courtyard. The guard had been discovered, or perhaps another had spotted them during their approach. "We run," Jorund ordered, drawing his sword. "Straight for the cellars. Cut down any who stand in our way." The return journey was chaos. Guards shouted and gave chase as the Norse warriors fought their way across the inner bailey. Jorund led the charge, his axe clearing a path through the surprised Saxon defenders. Eadwyn followed close behind, one arm around Erin, the other occasionally extending toward pursuers who then stumbled or fell as if tripping over invisible obstacles. They reached the cellar entrance just as a larger force of guards converged on them. Halvard and 3 warriors formed a shield wall at the door, buying time for the others to descend. "Go!" Halvard shouted to Jorund. "We'll hold them here and follow." Jorund hesitated, reluctant to leave his brother. "Go!" Halvard insisted. "Get the girls to safety." With a grim nod, Jorund plunged into the cellar passage, pulling Eadwyn and Erin with him. They raced through the dark tunnels, the sounds of combat fading behind them, replaced by the growing roar of the sea. When they reached the cave, Jorund cursed. The tide had risen faster than anticipated, water already knee-deep at the entrance. "We'll have to swim," he told Eadwyn. "Can your sister manage it?" "I can swim," Erin said defiantly, though fear shone in her eyes. Eadwyn looked at the churning water, then at her sister. "There's another way," she said quietly. "But it will cost me greatly." Before Jorund could question her, she waded into the rising water, extending both hands before her. The cave fell unnaturally silent, the roar of the tide muting as if heard from a great distance. Then, impossibly, the water began to recede, pulling back to reveal the tunnel entrance once more. "Go," Eadwyn commanded, her voice strained with effort. "Quickly. I cannot hold it long." Jorund stared in amazement at the parted waters, then grabbed Erin's hand. "Come," he urged, pulling the girl toward the tunnel. He glanced back at Eadwyn, concern etching his features. "Can you maintain this until Halvard and the others arrive?" "I will try," she promised, though her face had gone pale with exertion, a trickle of blood running from her nose. "But hurry them if you can." Jorund and Erin made it through the tunnel just as Halvard and the remaining warriors arrived at the cave. They stared in disbelief at the sight of Eadwyn holding back the tide through sheer force of will. "What sorcery is this?" one warrior gasped. "Life-saving sorcery," Halvard replied grimly. "Move!" They splashed through the receding water, reaching the tunnel entrance just as Eadwyn's strength began to fail. The water surged forward again the moment the last warrior cleared the passage, nearly catching Eadwyn herself before Jorund reached back to pull her to safety. She collapsed against him, her body limp with exhaustion. Blood flowed freely from her nose now, and her skin had taken on an alarming greyish pallor. "Eadwyn!" Jorund called, cradling her face. "Eadwyn, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and distant. "Did everyone make it?" she whispered. "Yes, thanks to you," Jorund assured her. "Rest now. I'll carry you." He lifted her into his arms, her weight frighteningly slight, and followed the others along the shoreline to where their ships waited. Erin walked beside him, her young face pinched with worry as she watched her sister's labored breathing. "Will she die?" the girl asked bluntly, in the way of children. "No," Jorund said with more confidence than he felt. "She is strong. Stronger than any of us realized." They reached the ships without further incident and immediately pushed off from shore. As they gained distance from the coast, Jorund laid Eadwyn carefully on a pile of furs in the stern, sheltered from the wind by a makeshift tent of sailcloth. Erin knelt beside her sister, taking one of Eadwyn's cold hands between her own. "She used too much power," the girl said matter-of-factly. "Mother always warned her about that." Jorund settled beside them. "Your mother taught you both about these abilities?" Erin nodded. "Eadwyn more than me. She has the stronger gift. Mother said it passes through the women in her family, but not equally." "What happens when she uses too much?" Jorund asked, watching Eadwyn's shallow breathing with concern. "She loses pieces of herself," Erin replied solemnly. "Mother said each working takes something that cannot be replaced. Use too much at once, and—" She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Jorund felt a cold dread settle in his stomach as he looked at Eadwyn's pale face. Had she sacrificed her life to save them all? "There must be something we can do," he insisted. Erin considered this, her young face thoughtful beyond her years. "Mother had a way," she said slowly. "When Eadwyn overextended once before." But what?" "It requires a willing sacrifice from another," the girl explained. "Life force freely given to replace what was lost." Jorund didn't hesitate. "How is it done?" Erin studied him with sudden intensity. "You would do this? Give part of your life for hers? You, a Norse raider who took her captive?" "I would," Jorund said simply. The girl nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw in his face. "Place your hands over her heart," she instructed. "I will guide the transfer, though my skill is less than Eadwyn's." Jorund did as directed, laying his palms gently on Eadwyn's chest. Erin placed her smaller hands atop his, then closed her eyes in concentration. "Think of your strength flowing into her," the girl murmured. "Visualize it as light or water, moving from your body to hers. Offer it freely, with pure intent." Jorund closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation of Eadwyn's heartbeat beneath his palms. He imagined his own life force, his vitality, his strength, flowing like mead from a horn into a cup, pouring from his body into hers. He thought of her courage, her wisdom, her unexpected compassion, and felt a surge of emotion that surprised him with its intensity. Under his hands, a warmth began to build. At first, he thought it was merely the heat of their combined touch, but it grew stronger, more focused. A strange tingling sensation spread up his arms, across his chest, as if something essential was being drawn from him. Weakness followed, a bone-deep fatigue unlike anything he had experienced before. His vision darkened at the edges, his breathing becoming labored. Still, he maintained the connection, willing whatever strength he could spare into Eadwyn's still form. "Enough," Erin said suddenly, pulling his hands away. "Any more would endanger you both." Jorund swayed, nearly collapsing beside Eadwyn before Halvard appeared to steady him. "What madness is this?" his brother demanded, looking between Jorund's ashen face and Eadwyn's still form. "What has she done to you?" "Not her," Jorund managed weakly. "My choice." Before Halvard could respond, Eadwyn stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Color had returned to her cheeks, though she still looked exhausted. "Jorund," she murmured, confusion evident in her voice. "What happened?" "You saved us all," he replied, his own voice barely stronger than hers. And then I returned the favor. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by disbelief. You gave me your life force? Willingly. A portion of it, he corrected. A fair exchange, I think. Eadwyn struggled to sit up, Erin helping to prop her against the side of the ship. Why would you do such a thing? She asked, searching Jorund's face. Such a gift is intimate. Sacred. Jorund met her gaze steadily, aware of Halvard and the other warriors watching this exchange with varying degrees of confusion and suspicion. Perhaps I've seen something in you worth saving, he said, echoing her earlier words to him. A look passed between them, profound and private, that needed no further explanation. Something had changed fundamentally in their relationship, something that could never be undone. Halvard cleared his throat uncomfortably. We should make for open water, he suggested. The Saxons may pursue once they realize their prisoners have escaped. Jorund nodded, forcing himself to focus on the immediate concerns of their journey. Set course for home, he ordered, though the effort of speaking left him dizzy. As the ship turned northward, Jorund found himself unable to maintain his usual vigilance. The life-sharing ritual had taken more from him than he had anticipated. He settled beside Eadwyn in the stern, both of them wrapped in furs against the chill. Rest, she told him, her voice stronger now. You need to recover your strength. As do you, he replied. They fell into silence, the rhythmic creaking of the ship and splash of oars lulling them toward sleep. Just before consciousness fled, Jorund felt Eadwyn's hand find his beneath the furs, her fingers intertwining with his own. It was a simple gesture, yet laden with meaning, trust, gratitude, and something more that neither was ready to name. They returned to the Orkney settlement 3 days later, both Jorund and Eadwyn having regained much of their strength during the journey. The arrival of Erin caused a stir among the Norse community, especially when they learned she was Eadwyn's sister. Another Saxon mouth to feed, grumbled some of the older warriors, though their complaints lacked real conviction. Eadwyn had earned her place among them during the winter illness, and by extension, her sister was granted a measure of acceptance. The tale of the rescue spread quickly, though Jorund had ordered his men to speak only of conventional battle prowess, not of Eadwyn's mysterious powers or the life-sharing ritual that followed. Such things would only fuel fear and suspicion among people already prone to see sorcery in the unknown. That evening, as the community gathered in the Great Hall to celebrate the successful raid, Jorund found himself watching Eadwyn from his high seat. She sat with Erin near the central hearth, the firelight illuminating her face as she laughed at something her sister said. The sound of her laughter, something he had rarely heard before, stirred something warm within his chest. Thyra settled beside him, following his gaze. You look at her differently now, she observed. Jorund didn't deny it. Much has changed. So I've heard, Thyra replied. Halvard told me some of what happened. Not all, I think, but enough to concern me. There's no cause for concern, Jorund assured her. Isn't there? Thyra leaned closer, lowering her voice. A Saxon woman with mysterious powers, who holds the loyalty of our Jarl. Many would find that concerning indeed. Jorund turned to face his sister directly. Do you trust my judgment, Thyra? I always have. Then trust it now, he said firmly. Eadwyn is not our enemy. Nor is she simply our captive anymore. What is she then? Thyra pressed. Jorund's gaze returned to Eadwyn, who now looked up as if sensing his attention. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, a silent communication passing between them. She is something else entirely, he said, echoing Thyra's own words from months before. Something I'm still coming to understand. As spring advanced, the settlement prepared for the raiding season. Ships were repaired, weapons sharpened, supplies gathered. Yet Jorund found himself increasingly reluctant to lead the expeditions he had once anticipated with eagerness. Eadwyn's words about breaking cycles of violence had taken root in his mind, growing alongside his changing feelings for her. The prospect of raiding Saxon villages like the one where she had grown up, no longer filled him with the warrior's fire it once had. One morning, as he supervised the loading of the lead ship, Eadwyn approached him on the docks. She wore Norse clothing now, her hair partially braided in the local style, yet she remained unmistakably herself, neither fully Saxon nor Norse, but something unique and compelling. "Your men are eager to sail," she observed, watching the warriors carry supplies aboard. "They are," Jorund confirmed. The winter was long, and many thirst for glory and wealth. "And you?" she asked, studying his face. "What do you thirst for, Jorund Wulfson?" The question caught him off guard with its directness. "I want what's best for my people," he said after a moment. "Security, prosperity, honor in the eyes of the gods. And you believe raiding will provide these things?" "It always has," he replied, though the words lacked conviction. Eadwyn was silent for a moment, gazing out at the ships in the harbor. "What if there was another way?" she finally asked. "A way that didn't require bloodshed and burning villages." "You speak of trade," Jorund said. "We already trade with many peoples." "I speak of more than trade," she corrected. "I speak of alliance. My father had connections throughout Northumbria and beyond. Merchants, landholders, even some within the king's court. With the right approach, agreements could be forged that would benefit both your people and mine." Jorund frowned. Why would Saxon lords agree to alliance with Norse raiders? "Because they're practical men, despite their prejudices," Eadwyn explained. "They understand that peace is more profitable than war. And with the right mediator, someone who understands both cultures." "Someone like you," Jorund finished for her. She nodded. "I could help build bridges between our peoples, Jorund. But only if you're willing to consider a different path." He studied her face, seeing the earnestness in her expression. "You truly believe this is possible?" "I do," she said firmly. "And I believe you are the man to make it happen. You have the respect of your warriors, the wisdom to see beyond immediate gain to longer prosperity." Her faith in him was humbling, and somewhat misplaced, he thought. "I am a warrior, Eadwyn. A raider. It's all I've ever been." "No," she disagreed, stepping closer. "You are more than that. I've seen it. In how you treat your people, in how you honored your word to my sisters, in how you gave of your own life force to save mine." Her hand touched his arm lightly. "There is greatness in you, Jorund. Not just the greatness of battle, but of vision." Her words stirred something in him, the longing for a legacy beyond burning villages and captured wealth. A desire to build rather than destroy. And something else, something that had been growing between them since that strange night on the returning ship when their life forces had mingled. "If I were to consider this path," he said carefully, "would you remain here? As advisor? As mediator between our peoples?" The question contained another, unspoken one that hung in the air between them. Eadwyn held his gaze steadily. "I would remain," she confirmed. "For many reasons." Before Jorund could respond, Halvard approached, his expression troubled. "Brother," he called. "The council awaits your decision on the raid targets." Jorund nodded. "Tell them I'll join them shortly." After Halvard departed, Jorund turned back to Eadwyn. "Come to the council meeting," he said, surprising her. "Share your thoughts on alliance. Let's see if others might be persuaded." Hope blossomed in her eyes. "You would allow a Saxon woman to address your council?" "I would allow a wise advisor to share her knowledge," he corrected. "Whether they listen is another matter entirely." The council meeting was contentious, as Jorund had expected. Many of the older warriors rejected outright the notion of seeking alliance with Saxons rather than raiding their settlements. Others, particularly those with families or trading interests, showed more openness to Eadwyn's suggestions. "The Saxons cannot be trusted," argued Fremund, pounding his fist on the table. "They would agree to terms only to betray us later." "As we have betrayed them in the past," Eadwyn countered calmly. "Trust must begin somewhere. And it can be built gradually, with small agreements that benefit both sides." "The woman speaks sense," said Ulfric, one of the settlement's most successful traders. "I have dealt with Saxon merchants for years. Many would prefer stable trade to constant fear of raids." "And what of glory?" demanded another warrior. "What of wealth? Would you have us become farmers and shepherds, with no sagas to tell of our deeds?" "There is glory in building something lasting," Jorund interjected. "Our ancestors settled these islands not just to raid from them, but to create homes, to raise families, to establish something that would outlive them." The debate continued for hours, opinions dividing roughly along generational lines. The older warriors, raised on tales of raid and plunder, resisted change. Younger men, especially those with children, showed more interest in stability and growth. Finally, Jorund raised his hand for silence. "I have heard all sides," he said. "And I have decided. We will split our forces this season. Those who wish to raid may do so, under Halvard's leadership. Those who wish to explore this new path may join me in establishing trading relationships with select Saxon settlements." It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely but allowed both traditions to continue. Halvard looked surprised but nodded his acceptance of the role. He, at least, understood the wisdom of not forcing warriors to choose a path they didn't believe in. As the council dispersed, some grumbling, others thoughtful, Eadwyn approached Jorund. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For listening. For considering. It may not work," he warned her. "The hatred between our peoples runs deep." "Yes," she acknowledged. "But so does our shared humanity. And sometimes, that proves stronger." In the days that followed, preparations continued for both endeavors. Halvard would lead 3 ships on traditional raids farther south, avoiding the areas where Jorund hoped to establish peaceful contacts. Jorund himself would take 2 ships, laden with trade goods rather than warriors, to specific Saxon ports where Eadwyn believed they might receive a cautious welcome. The night before the ships were to depart, Jorund found Eadwyn standing on the cliff overlooking the harbor, her hair blowing free in the evening breeze. Erin had already retired to the hall, leaving her sister alone with her thoughts. "Are you certain about this?" Jorund asked, coming to stand beside her. "Returning to Saxon lands, even under my protection, carries risk. Your own people might view you as a traitor for helping Norse invaders." Eadwyn smiled faintly. "I've considered that. But I believe in what we're trying to accomplish." "And I?" She hesitated, then continued more softly, "I find I no longer think of myself as solely Saxon, nor of you as solely Norse." Jorund turned to face her fully. "What are we, then?" "People," she said simply. "Just people trying to find a better way forward." She paused, gathering courage. "And perhaps something more than that, to each other." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Jorund took a step closer, close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in her sea-grey eyes. "When I took you from your village," he said quietly, "I never imagined this path. I thought you were simply a valuable hostage. A prize of war. And now," she prompted when he fell silent. "Now I see you are the most valuable thing I've ever found, but not in the way I first thought." His hand rose to touch her cheek gently. "You have changed me, Eadwyn. Challenged everything I believed about my place in the world." She leaned slightly into his touch. "You have changed me as well. Show me that people can grow beyond the roles assigned to them by birth and circumstance." "The life-sharing," Jorund said hesitantly. "When I gave you my strength, I felt something pass between us. Something more than just life force." Eadwyn nodded. "In my mother's tradition, such sharing creates a bond. Pieces of our souls now reside in each other. Is that why I sometimes feel what you feel? Sense your presence even when you're not nearby?" "Yes," she confirmed. "The bond will fade with time unless..." "Unless," he prompted when she hesitated. "Unless it is strengthened by choice," she finished. "By a deliberate joining of our paths." Jorund understood her meaning. "Marriage," he said softly. "Or something like it," she agreed. "My people have one tradition, yours another. But the essence is the same, a choosing of each other, witnessed and celebrated." Jorund took her hands in his expression solemn. "I never thought to find a partner in a Saxon captive," he said with a small smile. "Nor to find wisdom where I expected only hatred. And I never thought to love the man who claimed me as a war prize," she replied, the word love slipping out before she could reconsider it. Jorund's breath caught at her admission. "Love," he repeated, testing the word. "Is that what this is between us?" Eadwyn met his gaze steadily. "What else would you call it?" Instead of answering with words, Jorund leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, questioning, but deepened as she responded, her hands moving to his shoulders, then his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Jorund rested his forehead against hers. "I would call it the beginning of something new," he murmured. "Something neither Saxon nor Norse, but ours alone." Eadwyn smiled, a true smile that transformed her face with joy. "Then let us begin," she whispered. Their journey the next day took them to a small Saxon port where, according to Eadwyn's knowledge, a merchant named Cerdic held considerable influence. He had traded with Norse settlers before, despite the official hostility between their peoples, and might be amenable to more formal arrangements. As their ships approached, flying banners of truce rather than the fearsome ravens of war, Eadwyn stood beside Jorund at the prow. She wore a dress that blended Saxon and Norse styles, symbolizing her position as mediator between the cultures. "They're nervous," Jorund observed, noting the gathering of armed men on the docks. "But they haven't loosed arrows yet, which I count as a good sign." Eadwyn nodded. "Let me speak first," she suggested. "They'll be less threatened by a Saxon woman than a Norse warrior." When the ships docked, Eadwyn indeed stepped forward first, addressing the gathered Saxons in their own language. She explained her identity as Alderman Jarlathsdotter and introduced Jorund as a Jarl seeking peaceful trade rather than raid. Suspicion was evident in the Saxons' expressions, but curiosity won out. Cerdic himself stepped forward, a heavy-set man with shrewd eyes and a merchant's calculating gaze. "Eadwyn Jarlathsdotter," he acknowledged. "News of your capture reached us months ago. We thought you dead or enslaved." "Neither, as you can see," she replied. "I come now as an emissary of peace, with proposals that could benefit both our peoples." Cerdic's eyes shifted to Jorund, assessing the Norse warrior. "And you trust this man?" "The same who led the raid that killed your father." Eadwyn didn't flinch from the harsh truth. "I do," she said firmly. "People can change, Cerdic. Perspectives can shift. Isn't that the foundation of all good trade? Seeing value where others see only threat." The merchant's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You always were clever with words, even as a child." He sighed heavily. "Very well. I will hear these proposals. But the Norse must leave their weapons on their ships." Jorund stepped forward. "My men will keep their eating knives only," he agreed. As a sign of good faith. What followed was a tense but productive meeting in Cerdic's hall. Eadwyn presented the proposal she and Jorund had developed: specific goods to be traded, protective arrangements for merchants of both cultures, even the possibility of Norse settlers leasing land for farming rather than taking it by force. "This is unprecedented," Cerdic said when she finished. "Many will oppose it, on both sides." "Many opposed the first trade between our peoples," Eadwyn countered. "Yet here you stand, a wealthy man because of it." "There is profit in peace," Jorund added. "More sustainable profit than raid and plunder can provide." Cerdic studied them both for a long moment. "There is something between you two," he observed shrewdly. "More than alliance." Eadwyn glanced at Jorund, then nodded. "There is," she acknowledged. "Another bridge between our cultures." The merchant laughed suddenly. "Alderman Jarlath would spin in his grave," he said, though without malice. "His favorite daughter, partnered with a Norse raider." "Former raider," Jorund corrected. "I seek a different path now." Cerdic nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps there is hope after all." He rose from his seat. "I will support your initial proposals, at least as an experiment. If they prove profitable, others will follow, regardless of old hatreds." It was a tentative beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. Over the following weeks, Jorund and Eadwyn visited 3 more Saxon settlements, facing varying degrees of hostility and interest. In each place, Eadwyn's diplomatic skills and Jorund's evident sincerity gradually won at least provisional acceptance of their ideas. By the time they returned to Orkney, summer was well advanced. They found the settlement thriving, with Halvard's raiding party having returned a week earlier, laden with plunder but also bearing news of increasing Saxon resistance. The easy targets grow scarce, Halvard reported during the welcome feast. More settlements are building defenses, organizing better responses to attacks. All the more reason to consider Eadwyn's approach, Jorund suggested. To his surprise, Halvard nodded. Perhaps, he admitted. Though many of the men will take convincing. That convincing came in unexpected form a month later when the first Saxon trading ship arrived at their settlement. The sight of a Saxon vessel approaching voluntarily, laden with goods rather than warriors, caused a sensation among the Norse community. This is unprecedented, Thyra acknowledged as they watched the ship dock. Cerdic must have been more impressed by your arguments than he let on. Jorund glanced at Eadwyn, who stood beside him with a satisfied smile. Or by his projected profits, he suggested. The arrival of Saxon traders, nervous but determined, marked a turning point. What had been theoretical now became concrete, actual goods exchanged, actual relationships formed, actual gold changing hands without a drop of blood spilled. As autumn approached, Jorund and Eadwyn formalized their relationship in a ceremony that blended Norse and Saxon traditions. They exchanged rings and vows before both the settlement's people and a small delegation of Saxon merchants who had come to recognize the union of the woman they now called the Bridge. I bind my life to yours, Jorund declared, placing a gold ring on Eadwyn's finger. Not as conqueror or conquered, but as equal partners on a shared path. I join my strength to yours, Eadwyn responded, her voice clear in the hushed hall. Not forgetting the past, but choosing to build a different future. As was traditional in Norse weddings, Thor's hammer was placed in the bride's lap to invoke fertility and blessing, while Eadwyn incorporated elements of her mother's more ancient traditions, binding their hands with a cord woven with symbols of both cultures. The celebration that followed lasted 2 days, with feasting, competitions, and the formal presentation of a new hall being built for the couple at the settlement's edge, a visible symbol of their joined lives and the new path they represented. On the 3rd night, as they lay together in their new home, Eadwyn traced the patterns of old scars on Jorund's chest, her expression thoughtful. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. "About cycles," she replied. "How they repeat and less deliberately broken. How something that began with violence, your raid, my captivity, has transformed into this." She gestured to encompass their entwined bodies, their shared home, the alliance they were building between their peoples. "The gods work in mysterious ways," Jorund observed. "Perhaps this was their plan all along. Perhaps this is why they sent me dreams of you before we ever met." Eadwyn smiled. "Perhaps. Or perhaps we made this ourselves, choice by choice, day by day, defying what fate seemed to have set for us." "Does it matter which?" he asked, drawing her closer. "No," she decided after a moment's thought. "What matters is that we continue. That the peace we've started spreads and takes root." "It will," Jorund promised. Already Halvard speaks of trying the trading approach next season instead of raiding. And 2 other Jarls have sent word asking about our methods. "And my power?" Eadwyn asked more softly. "What of that legacy? My mother's bloodline carries gifts that should be preserved, taught to the next generation." Jorund placed his hand gently on her abdomen, where no child yet grew but where both hoped one would soon take form. "Our children will know both heritages," he assured her. "The strength of Norse tradition and the power of your mother's line. They will be bridges, as you are." Eadwyn covered his hand with her own. "Not just as I am," she corrected. "As we are, together. The chief and his prize who became something else entirely." "Something better," Jorund agreed, kissing her softly. "Something neither of us could have become alone." Outside their hall, the northern lights began to dance across the sky, ribbons of green and purple illuminating the settlement below. Some said such lights were the reflections of fallen warriors making their way to Valhalla. Others claimed they were the gods themselves, watching over the world of mortals. Eadwyn had her own interpretation, taught by her mother. They were reminders that boundaries, between sky and earth, between peoples, between supposed enemies, were more permeable than they appeared. That with courage and vision, any divide could be crossed, any hatred transformed. As she and Jorund drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, she whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever powers had brought them to this moment, this improbable peace, this unlikely love, this new beginning that promised to ripple outward through generations yet unborn.